They said life was sacred. They never said it was loyal. That was the first line I recorded in my field log upon descending through the green-grey haze of Verdant IX, a world once declared sanctified by decree of the ecclesiarchy, and now sealed beneath the quarantine sigils of the Ordo Sepulturum. I had read the reports, of course, the usual blend of clerical optimism and imperial omission. The soil of Verdant IX demonstrates unique purgative properties against biological corruption, they said, a miracle of the Emperor's light made manifest. What they failed to mention was that the miracle had grown teeth. The shuttle broke through the upper clouds, and the planet unfolded beneath me, a patchwork of ruins and overgrowth, as if some great gardener had tired of symmetry halfway through creation. The forests below were unnaturally dense, their canopies pulsing faintly with bioluminescent veins that formed ecclesiastical patterns, crosses, sigils, and looping circles of light. For a moment, I thought it was artifice, an illusion projected by the planet's atmosphere. But the augur confirmed the readings: organic luminescence, consistent with modified fungal chlorocytes, living light. I felt the whisper of unease beneath my curiosity. It is always the same with forbidden ecosystems. The first impression is beauty, and the second is recognition. Recognition that the beauty is watching you. The sanctified gardens stretched for kilometers beyond the landing zone, endless terraces of stone and earth where the dead of 3 crusades had been buried. The ecclesiarchy had chosen this world as a garden of purity, where corruption would be defeated not through fire or blade, but through redemption by life. They believed the Emperor's light could bless the soil so profoundly that even rot would become holy. The marble grave markers were half swallowed by moss, each carved with the double-headed aquila now softened by creeping vines. Between the rows of sarcophagi, skeletal hands jutted through cracked soil, not in blasphemous resurrection, but in eternal supplication, grasping toward the weak sunlight. It was beautiful, in the way a wound might be beautiful when it glistens cleanly before infection sets in. Sister Althea accompanied me, a relic of the ecclesiarchy's failed experiment, her faith as brittle as the purity seals fluttering from her robes. She walked with her head bowed, murmuring the benediction of renewal. Althea, the Emperor grants all things their purpose, Magos. Even the rot feeds the roots of sanctity. Lorien, an elegant sentiment. Though I wonder, if rot feeds sanctity, what does sanctity feed? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The wind did, carrying with it a scent unlike any I had catalogued, sweet and metallic, like perfume distilled from blood and honey. I began the first survey within an hour of arrival. The Auspex detected abnormally high nitrogen levels within the upper soil layers, nearly triple the expected concentration. That, combined with trace biomatter of unknown taxonomy, suggested ongoing decomposition at rates far exceeding natural limits. Yet there were no carrion flies, no scavenger life at all, only flowers. They sprouted from every mound and marker, white as bleached bone, their petals translucent as skin stretched too thin. The blossoms seemed to pulse faintly when touched by light, and beneath their roots lay the decomposed remains of the sanctified dead. I collected a specimen. It bled, not sap, blood. Old, thick and clotted, but unmistakably human. Floral tissue contains trace amounts of hemoglobin analogues. Stem structure partially ossified. Cellular growth pattern displays symbiotic necrogenesis. The plant feeds upon decaying tissue, but also preserves it from full decomposition. Suggests the cycle of decay is arrested, not completed. It's as though the dead refuse to surrender their substance, as if they're bargaining with the soil. We ventured deeper into the terraces, The ground felt soft beneath my boots, like walking upon lungs instead of loam. Every step released a faint sigh from the earth, gas escaping through unseen fissures. When I held my auspex closer to the ground, I detected rhythmic pressure fluctuations. Breathing. The soil was breathing. Althea began to pray louder, her voice trembling. Her breath came out as mist, though the air was warm. By the third hour, we reached the central sanctum, the chamber of renewal. It had once been a cathedral, its spire crowned by stained glass, shaped into a stylized sunburst. Now, the glass was gone, replaced by a canopy of vines that glowed with ghostly light. Within, the altar was cracked in half, and from that fissure rose a single tree. At first I mistook it for petrified wood. Its bark was pale and smooth, and the branches hung heavy with blossoms that resembled human faces. Peaceful, expressionless, sculpted from ivory. Only when I approached did I realize they were not sculpted. They were faces, each one a perfect mask of a soldier, priest, or penitent, their features drawn from those buried beneath. The tree had taken their likeness. I ran a scanner across the trunk. My cogitator returned an anomaly I refused to log under its proper category. Trace warp resonance. The garden was alive, but not only alive. I am a man of logic, of reason, but logic falters when the data begins to hum. The machine spirits of my instruments flickered, their displays blooming into floral patterns before rebooting. The Voxcaster whispered words I did not transmit. "Welcome home, Magos." The voice was soft, feminine, familiar. For an instant I thought it was Althea, but she stood several meters away, her hands pressed together, her lips moving in silent prayer. The words had come from the soil itself. From every mound around us, the blossoms began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. Their faces, if such things can be said to have faces, turned toward us. Wind brushed the petals into motion, and the sound was like sighs escaping the mouths of sleepers. A low chorus rose, too faint for words, too structured for mere noise. Althea. Do you hear them, Magos? Lorien. I hear data corruption in the wind. Althea. No. It's prayer. She stepped forward, kneeling among the graves. The flowers bent toward her as if in benediction. One brushed her cheek. She flinched, then smiled, tears running down her face. Althea. They are singing, Lorien. They are thankful. I did not believe her then. I believed only the evidence. The hum beneath my feet, the whisper within my vox, the tremor in the petals as if responding to our presence. It is the curse of the curious, to see wonder and call it anomaly, to see horror and call it data. As the light faded and we returned to the shuttle, I turned once more toward the terraces. In the twilight, the blossoms glowed faintly, not with reflected light, but from within. Each grave became a lantern, and the valley shimmered like a city of ghosts. The auspex recorded seismic movement far below the surface, something stirring beneath, slow and patient. I knew then that Verdant IX was not dead. It was dreaming, and dreams once planted always find a way to bloom. Preliminary findings inconclusive, soil composition anomalous, signs of accelerated biological reclamation consistent with partially sentient fungal root systems. Recommend extended observation under containment. Pause. He whispers. In their silence, the dead had learned to whisper. The body was fresher than it had any right to be. Verdant IX had been cut off for decades, its burial records incomplete, its ecclesiastical attendant staff reduced to one frightened woman and a planet of humming graves. Yet when I had Althea guide me to an interment from 23 years prior, an old guardsman who'd died of last-burn trauma on pilgrimage, his corpse looked as if it had lain no more than a month, skin taut, eyes collapsed but present, lips shrunken but intact. I recorded the observation. Decomposition retarded, likely due to soil factors, possible bioactive field. Althea stood opposite me, fingers tight around a rosary made from broken purity seals. She did not like that we were doing this. Disturbing the dead, even for study, went against her instincts, against her indoctrination. "Do we have to open him?" she asked, voice low. "We buried the truth in him," I said. "So yes, we have to open him." "We buried him," she said. "Not your truth. You will find they are the same." I laid the corpse on the portable autopsy slab, servo limbs unfolding from my back with gentle precision. I kept the movements slow for her sake. Ecclesiarchy staff have a way of thinking all mechanicus procedures are desecrations. In this case, she would not be entirely wrong. Scalpel, incision along the sternum, skin parted easily, too easily. There was resistance, but not from desiccated muscle, from something newer. Beneath the dermis, the first anomaly appeared. The subcutaneous fat layer was laced with filaments, pale, fibrous, branching like capillaries. When I tugged one free, it came out in a long, elastic strand, faintly pulsing at the end as though reluctant to leave its host. "By the throne," Althea whispered, stepping back. "Not the throne," I said. "The soil." I widened the incision and drew back the flesh. What lay beneath would have made a fine illustration for a forbidden catechism. The human vascular system was still present, aorta, vena cava, pulmonary branches, but each major vessel had fused with an intruding structure of plant-like origin. Veins met vines, arteries met root bundles. The red of man embraced the white of soil. "This is impossible," Althea said. "On the contrary," I said, leaning in, "it is efficient." I traced the union point with a mechadendrite. At the juncture, human tissue had not rejected the invader. It had built around it. The plant fiber, no, call it what it was, the root, had been allowed into the circulatory system, where it had carried nutrients back toward the soil, a two-way system. "Bidirectional flow," I said. "The corpse fed the ground. The ground fed the corpse, a closed loop." "That's not how burial works," she said. "It is here." I ran a chemical sniff. The sap running through the root was rich in nitrogen, calcium, iron, the minerals taken from human decay. But there were trace agents I did not recognize, spore compounds, persistent viral shells, and something that hummed on the edge of detection. Not chemical, not electrical. A pattern. I had seen something like it before years ago in a sealed data crypt on Mars, a record of a Death Guard garden found on a plague moon, plants grown from rot, joy grown from death, flora that laughed as they consumed. The magos who wrote the report used a phrase I had not forgotten. Resemblance to the so-called Plague Father's gardens is non-trivial. I stared at the root system pulsing in the corpse. The resemblance here was also non-trivial. "No," I said aloud, as much to myself as to any listening spirit. "This is parallel evolution under unique holy conditions. Not that." "What?" Althea asked. "Nothing. You're lying, Margos." "Then let me lie. It keeps us both calmer." She made the sign of the aquila over the corpse. "Even the Emperor's light feeds the garden of decay," she said, repeating an old Shrine World proverb. I looked up. "What did you say?" It was what the old confessors said when this first began. When the first flowers grew from the graves, they said, "Do not fear. Even his light sustains what must return to him." "Convenient theology," I said. "What would you prefer?" Her eyes flashed. "That we burn the dead we swore to honor." "Yes," I said simply. "If this is what the soil does." She looked away. I continued the examination. The heart had been consumed almost entirely. In its place, A thick knot of root flesh had formed, beating very, very slowly, not with blood, with sap. Each beat pushed fluid not into arteries but downward, through fine channels that ran out the back of the corpse, along the slab, and into the dirt beneath us. I tapped one of the channels with a stylus. It vibrated, and for an instant I heard something, very faint, very far away, like sound traveling through wood. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" "Bring your ear. Here, to the channel." She hesitated, then leaned close, pressing her ear to the root that had once been an artery. Her face changed. "What is it?" I said. "It's singing," she whispered, "like the gardens but clearer. Not wind, voices." I listened again. I tuned out the wind, the churring of cogitators, the quiet hum of my augmetics. There, beneath it all, a murmur, a rhythm, 4 notes, repeated as though someone far below was chanting without breath. I checked the ground under the slab. The roots went straight down, vanishing into Verdant IX itself. "The Psalms of Blooming Rot," Althea said almost reverently. "You have a name for it already?" I asked. "It began months after the first burials. We thought it was the wind in the stone. Then it started answering the hymns. The soil responded to song. Sometimes it followed. Sometimes it corrected." I wrote that down. Soil that corrects liturgy. Wonderful. "This is not faith," I said. "This is memory. The soil is carrying impressions, chemical, maybe psychic, of the dead and playing them back along root structures, like a relayed vox, a very slow, very biological vox. And if it is their souls?" she asked. I met her eyes. "Then your souls have roots." That shut her up. I began to excise a segment of fused vessel for later study. As I cut, the root twitched again. This time the vibration climbed up my instrument and into my arm like a tuning fork. A word formed, faint, drawn out, shaped by no tongue. "Cold." I froze. "Althea," I said slowly, "you told me this man was a guardsman." "Yes, pilgrim transport escort. He asked to be buried here. He died alone." "Yes." "No family? No kin?" Her mouth tightened. "A brother, younger, died on Iox Primus." "Iox Primus," I repeated. "Not here. No, not here." I cut again. The root shivered. Althea's head snapped toward the floor. "What was that?" she whispered. "I didn't say anything," I said. She stared at the soil beneath the slab. Her pupils widened, her lips parted, color drained from her face. "Sister?" I said. "Report." She sank to her knees, hands flat on the dirt now, not caring about ritual cleanliness. She pressed her ear to it like a child to a door. "Again," she breathed. "Say it again." There was nothing on my auspex, no vox pickup, no measurable sound outside of background frequencies, but Althea began to weep. "It's him," she said. "It's Joran. Emperor, it's Joran." I frowned. "Your brother died sector systems away. His body was never brought here." "He was always singing," she sobbed. "When we were novitiates, in the dormitories, he would hum the litany of returning. He had a crack in his voice. You could always tell it was him. I can hear it. I can hear the crack." I checked the root again, tracing it down. This corpse's vascular system had fused with the garden's, yes, but the garden's root web was not local. It was planetary, a single, slow thinking network. If a pattern had entered it, a voice, a hymn, a beloved sound, the network could carry it, preserve it, repeat it, feed it back to any node that listened. To her, it was her brother. To me, it was a memory bundle carried in necrotic soil. "Althea," I said more gently than I intended. "It is not him. It is an echo." "Echoes don't say my name," she whispered. Her eyes were far away now, back in some scholar dormitory on a hive world, where a boy with a cracked voice sang evening hymns to annoy his sister. "Althea," I said again, but it was useless. I looked down at the opened corpse, vessels braided with roots, heart replaced by sapknot, mouth parted as if to sing. The soil had taken more than flesh. It had taken patterns, relationships, longings. It had remembered. I ended the day's record. Conclusion: Verdant IX substrate displays not only biological reclamation, but also mnemonic retention. Human remains appear to serve as anchor points for a planet-wide root consciousness capable of reproducing vocal patterns and possibly emotive signatures. The soil remembers. Behind me, Althea pressed her face harder into the dirt, as if afraid the voice would fade. "Joran," she whispered, voice breaking. "Say it again, please. Say my name again." And from somewhere far below, from a garden that should not think, from roots that should not speak, something answered her. Chapter 3: The First Bloom. It began with a sound, not the sound of wind or water, but the sound of growth, a soft, fibrous stretching that came from below the graves like wood creaking in time with a heartbeat. Verdant IX was stirring again, and this time it would not settle. I had spent the night cataloguing the vascular fungal hybrid we'd uncovered, but my mind would not rest. The data didn't fit any category known to the Mechanicus or the Biologist Guild. This was not disease, not corruption, not even evolution. It was intention, something ancient and patient that had learned the art of imitation. At dawn, the valley glowed. A pale, milky light drifted through the mist, and I thought at first it was the sun refracting through spores. Then I saw the source. The soil itself had begun to emit bioluminescent pollen, blooming from cracks in the marble graves. The air shimmered with it, soft as candlelight, beautiful in the way infection looks beautiful beneath a microscope. Althea stood beside me, clutching her rosary. Her lips trembled as she whispered prayers to the Emperor, though her eyes refused to close. She couldn't look away, neither could I. It smiled with lips of moss. That is what I wrote later, a single line, the only way I could describe what we saw next. A body shifted among the graves, a man buried 2 decades ago, one we had exhumed for sample testing. His skin had darkened to a greenish-grey hue, but it did not peel or crack. It pulsed. The moss that had overtaken his jaw and throat rippled as if breathing. Then his chest rose. "Impossible," I murmured. The ribs arched upward, pushing against the burial cloth. Beneath it, a root structure coiled, twitching like serpents under flesh. His hands spasmed. Soil poured from his mouth, followed by a bloom of thin white flowers bursting from between his teeth. He opened his eyes. Or rather, the sockets that had once been eyes, now filled with buds that opened like twin blossoms, leaking bioluminescent dust. His head tilted toward us. The jaw flexed, and what came out was not a cry nor a word, but a long, wet exhalation that scattered spores in a fine, glittering mist. Althea fell to her knees. Merciful Emperor. I activated my respirator and stepped closer. The readings on my auspex flared into chaos, neural impulses without synapses, heat signatures without metabolism, motion without life. The body was a conduit, not undead, not alive. It was being used. "Stay back," I said sharply. "It's breathing contamination." She shook her head. "No, it's praying." And then I heard it too. The exhalations were rhythmic, short, long, short, forming syllables that my ears refused to accept as coincidence. Each puff of spore carried tone, shape, structure. When they drifted against the marble headstones, they resonated, humming faintly like 1,000 tiny choir pipes. It was a hymn. The dead were exhaling hymns. The figure sat upright with a groan of cracking bone. The motion wasn't violent, it was graceful, almost reverent. Moss sloughed from his shoulders as more flowers bloomed along his spine, spreading in spirals. The spores caught the morning light and glowed gold-green around him. A grotesque parody of Eden. Althea whispered another prayer, this one desperate. "In the Emperor's name, be still." The corpse obeyed. The head turned slowly, almost kindly toward her voice. For a moment, I thought I saw recognition in that hollow face. Then the moss parted at its mouth again, and a new exhalation came, a thicker cloud of spores that swirled toward her like incense smoke. "Get back," I shouted, pulling her by the arm, but it was too late. The spores touched her skin and left faint glowing traces across her cheek like paint. She didn't flinch, she only whispered, "It's warm." I triggered the auspex again. The readings were impossible. The air was alive, billions of microspores carrying trace bioelectric potential, communicating in patterns too structured for mere contagion. My instruments whined and reset. For the first time since arriving, I felt something close to fear. The corpse collapsed back against the soil. Its chest continued to rise and fall in shallow rhythm, its flowers swaying with each breath. The pollen glowed brighter, forming constellations of light above the graves. A hum filled the air, deep, steady, and wrong. "The garden is singing," Althea said. "No," I said. "It's transmitting." "What do you mean?" "The spores are a medium. Information exchange through particulate motion. A biological vox." She turned toward me, her eyes wide. "Then who is listening?" The question hung in the air. I had no answer. I turned back to the body. The moss around its throat had begun to thicken, curling upward into tendrils that reached for the nearest stone. They connected, forming a thin green filament between grave and grave, then another, then another. Within minutes, the entire section of the garden was linked, a network of veins pulsing faintly with green light. Althea stepped forward, drawn like a moth. "It's beautiful." "It's spreading," I said. "Back away." She didn't move. Her face was slack, eyes glistening. The filaments pulsed in time with her heartbeat. I could hear it through the auspex, matching frequency for frequency. The garden was synchronizing with her. I grabbed her wrist, dragged her back, and severed one of the root lines with my cutting laser. The moment it snapped, the light dimmed. The corpse's chest stilled. The spores fell silent. "Enough," I said, breathing hard. "We've seen what we came to see." She looked at me as though I'd killed something sacred. "You didn't have to hurt it." "It's not an it, sister. It's a process, and it's not done." I sealed my respirator, scanned again. The hum persisted, deep below, far beyond our reach. A subterranean chorus echoing the same rhythm as the reanimated corpse. The entire valley was awake now, whispering through the soil, through the pollen, through the air itself. I recorded my findings, my voice steadier than my thoughts. Field log, Magos Lorian Mirth. Subject 3 displays partial locomotion under no detectable power source. Photosynthetic energy transfer through plant flesh interface confirmed. Airborne spores exhibit rhythmic emission patterns resembling structured language. Recommend immediate quarantine escalation. The garden is communicative. A pause. I coughed. Once, twice, harder. The second cough brought blood to my lips. Thin red droplets that shimmered with flecks of green. Number. I wiped my mouth and tasted metal and mold. A faint sweetness coated my tongue, the same sweetness that hung in the air. My respirator's filters had failed. I had inhaled the spores. Althea saw the blood. "You're infected." "No," I said too quickly. "Contaminated, not infected. There's a difference." "Does the garden think so?" she whispered. I ignored her, forced myself to finish the recording. My hands shook as I set the auspex to transmit. "This is Magos Biologist Lorian Mirth of the Mechanicus Exploratory Detachment. Coordinates attached. Verdant IX is changing. The bodies are merging with the flora. Reanimation is occurring through photosynthetic process, not warp activity. This is not resurrection. It is reclamation." I hesitated. The corpse's mouth twitched again, and more spores rose, drifting in a spiral that formed a faint outline, a human silhouette traced in luminous dust. The face was indistinct, but I could feel its gaze, watching, waiting. The garden grows. I said softly into the vox. Do not come. I cut the transmission and turned toward Althea. Her face was pale, her pupils dilated. She was staring at the corpse, which now lay perfectly still, its flowers closing like eyelids. The valley had gone quiet again, but the silence was heavy, filled with the memory of its song. Magos, she whispered, if it can make the dead breathe, what will it make the living become? I looked at my trembling, blood-streaked hand and didn't answer her, because I already knew. Chapter 4. Rot is mercy. There is a moment, somewhere between life and dissolution, when the body stops fighting. I had seen it 1,000 times in the field hospitals of the Imperium. Soldiers clinging to breath with fingers of iron, refusing to die because duty hadn't signed the release. But Verdant IX showed me another way. Here the body did not surrender to nothing. It surrendered to something. It handed itself over to a waiting mouth in the soil. That morning, I watched a leaf fall from one of the cathedral vines. It didn't wither. It didn't dry. It landed on the ground, softened, and within minutes, hair-fine filaments reached up from the earth, pierced it, and pulled it gently under, folding the detritus back into the body of the garden. A perfect cycle. A kindness. I wrote in my slate, decay is not the enemy here. Decay is the mechanic of belonging. Then, after a long pause, I added a second line I would not have dared to write on Mars. Perhaps the Plague Father understands this better than we do. I erased his name at once, of course. Old reflex. But the thought stayed. Althea noticed I was quieter than usual. You're thinking blasphemies, she said. I am thinking systems. You're thinking blasphemies in the shape of systems. You're not wrong, I said. We had moved our workspace to the edge of the sanctified gardens now, close enough to observe new blooms, but not so close that the spores constantly coated our tools. I had rigged a containment tarp over the area. Underneath it, a dozen samples of Verdant IX soil sat in different containers, some moist, some dry, some with bone fragments, some with strands of human hair, some with pulverized purity wax. Every single one showed growth, slow in some, riotous in others, but growth all the same. The soil remembered, and it preferred to remember people. I ran the 5th autopsy that day on a pilgrim woman whose burial seal said simply, she walked till her feet bled. Her feet, when exhumed, were intact. Her calves, however, were threaded through with mycelial tangles like knit lace. The fungi growing through her muscles had bloomed only after her heart had stopped, respectful almost, and now filled the hollows of her bones, keeping her structure from collapse. Preservation through permeation, death by way of support. I logged it in a new file and named the file without thinking, The Gospel of Growth. Althea saw it over my shoulder. You can't call it that. Why not? Because Gospels are for truth. Then it's well named. Magos. I am not preaching against the Emperor, I said. I am recording that here in this valley, something is proving that destruction and creation are not opposites. They are the same act seen from two ends. That's Nurgle talk, she whispered. Is it? I turned to her. Or is it farming talk? Is it the talk of every agri-world that tills the bones of the dead into the fields so that wheat might rise whiter? She swallowed. The ecclesiarchy never. The ecclesiarchy buries saints in shrines so their holiness seeps into the walls. This is the same principle. Only the gardener is different. She didn't like that. She didn't argue either. The day's studies were interrupted when the vox at the edge of the tarp crackled. A half-burnt Imperial Guard transponder, still powered after Throne knew how many years, emitted a distress ping. Nearby, toward the lower terraces, I followed it. We found him under a fallen pillar, not ancient, but only recently collapsed, its marble eaten from below by roots. A guardsman, Cadian pattern flak vest, face gaunt with fever. He hadn't been dead long enough to register on the ecclesiarchy's scrolls. He wasn't dead at all. He was dying. His left side was crushed, ribs splintered. But what should have been a mass of blood and pulp was instead orderly. Mushrooms, pale and bell-shaped, were blooming from the wounds, plugging them, drinking the blood as it welled. Where a shard of stone had pierced his thigh, a fan of shelf fungi had spread, already hardening into a support to keep the leg in shape. He looked at me with fever-bright eyes and laughed a little. "You're late," he rasped. "How long have you been here?" I asked, kneeling. "A day, maybe 2, hard to tell. Garden keeps me warm." Althea knelt too, whispering a prayer, but he put a hand on hers. "No, sister," he said, "no more burning prayers. I like this." "You're in pain," she said, eyes wet. He smiled. "Not as much as I should be." I examined the wounds. The fungi weren't random. They were acting as clotting agents, as scaffolding, as digestive aids. Some were feeding on dead tissue, others were feeding nutrients back into his bloodstream. The garden was buying him time, not to heal, to join. "This world, it doesn't let go," he whispered. "Back on Crisis, when you fell, you fell. Here, it catches you." "You need medical attention," Althea said, voice firm now. "We can get you back to the shuttle." He shook his head. "My squad's under there." He looked past us at the rubble. 3 of them. They're already feeding. Not right to leave. "Staying will kill you," I said. He looked at the mushrooms blooming from his ribs and chuckled softly. "Staying will make me useful. Useful, not holy, not saved. Useful, the most imperial of virtues, even in death, service." I looked around us. Vines had already begun to creep toward him, sensing fresh biomass. Tendrils coiled like curious fingers along the broken stone, stopping a meter short of his boots, as if waiting for permission. "This isn't corruption," I said quietly. "This is allocation." "What?" Althea asked. "This isn't plague. Plague wastes. This recycles." The guardsman turned his head slightly. "You one of the cog boys?" "Yes." He nodded, satisfied. "Then you get it. Nothing's wasted, right? Even the dead." "Especially the dead," I said. A mushroom on his shoulder burst, releasing a puff of greenish-brown spores. He breathed them in and his breath steadied. Althea recoiled. "How can you not fear that?" she asked him. "Because it's gentle," he said, eyes half-lidded now. "Not like gas, not like demon spit. It's soft. It holds." His eyes locked onto mine. "You seeing this, cog boy? Write it down." "I am," I said. "Every moment." "Good." He coughed, and a small cluster of caps emerged at the corners of his mouth like pale flowers. "Tell 'em. We didn't die screaming. Tell 'em we fed a world." Althea was weeping openly now. "I can give you the Emperor's peace," she said. "A clean death." He shook his head. "This is peace, sister." His gaze unfocused, then snapped back. "You hear that? Down there." I listened. The Psalms again. The same blooming liturgy we heard in the autopsy routes, only louder here, closer to open soil. The garden was singing to him, welcoming him. He thanked me as he died for giving him roots. That is the line I will keep. Because in that moment, as the last of his breath left him in a cloud of faint fruit-scented spores, he smiled, a strange moss-green smile. And I realized he did not fear becoming soil. He feared being forgotten. The garden offered him memory. We watched as the vines finally touched his boots. Slowly, like attendants at a funeral, they wrapped his legs, his torso, his arms. Mushrooms finished their work and hardened. A leaf settled over his face. Not to hide him, to plant him. Althea whispered the litany of the departed. I didn't stop her. I even bowed my head. It felt right, even here. When we returned to the tarp, I opened the Gospel of Growth again. Entry 2. Rot is not the opposite of life. Rot is life adjusting its shape to new constraints. Where we see defilement, the soil sees opportunity. Where we insist on linearity, birth, bloom, death, The garden insists on circulation. The emperor promises eternity through faith. The garden promises eternity through function, which is kinder. I sat there looking at the line longer than I should have. Then I added, blasphemy is often just biology spoken aloud. It was evening when Althea came to me. I had started coughing again. Not just blood this time, but flecks of brown-green. The spores I'd inhaled during the first bloom were not idle. They had found damp warmth in my throat. They had decided to stay. She saw the stain on my sleeve and went pale. You should have let me purify you. I need to see what it does, I said, from inside. You're not a sample, Lorien. I am now. She didn't argue further. She took out her censer, lit it, and began to swing it slowly, chanting the incense rite for the enduring. It was a prayer used in sick rooms, on ships full of plague, in trenches where the dead lay with the living. I'd smelled it all over the Imperium. Bitter, sharp, purifying. This was not that smell. The smoke that rose from her censer was sweet and damp, like burned mycelium and wet bark. It filled the tarp, coiling around my augmetics, clinging to my tongue. She hadn't filled it with chapel incense. She had filled it with Verdant IX. You're praying with it now? I asked, surprised. She didn't meet my eyes. It listens better than most priests. And it smells like rot. Yes, she said, voice small, but kind rot. I lay back, throat raw, lungs buzzing faintly with remembered hymns from the soil, and let her pray over me. Between us, the line was gone, faith bleeding into science, science admitting wonder. On this world, both of us were being pulled downward, patiently, lovingly, toward the same waiting earth. Chapter 5, The Garden Answers. I woke because the ground was breathing louder than I was. Not the faint, almost polite pulses we had felt on the first days. This was deeper, heavier, like something vast and slow had rolled over in the dark beneath Verdant IX and decided to inhale. The entire valley rose and fell with it. My tools rattled. The tarp ropes creaked. Spores drifted from disturbed soil in lazy, glowing spirals. For a moment I thought it was seismic. Then I realized the rhythm was too perfect, too alive. The garden was responding. To what? To me, to the dying guardsman, to the spores I carried in my lungs now, to the prayers Althea had dared to say in its language. I stepped out from under the tarp. Verdant IX was changing in front of me. The terraces of graves, once neat and ecclesiastically symmetrical, had softened, their edges rounded by roots that had swollen in the night. Vines crawled over abandoned shrines, not with the chaotic hunger of wild growth, but with intent, tracing the aquila, wrapping prayer stelae, draping statues in green vestments like a bishop's cope. The broken basilica we had explored before now wore a crown of fungi fat with dew, each cap luminescent, casting down sickly jade light over cracked marble. The whole valley glowed. Bioluminescent pollen hung in the air like stars dragged low. The mist caught it, turned it into veils of green-gold light that flowed between the trees. The sound, Emperor, the sound, was like 1,000 throats humming one note, then bending that note into words too slow for human mouths, a litany for roots. Althea stumbled out after me, hair loose, eyes wide in awe and terror. It's answering, she whispered. Yes, I said, something called. It is answering. What called? I touched my own chest. Maybe this. She stared at me then, not at the valley. You breathed it. You let it in. I needed to know what it does, I said, and now it knows you. That was fair. We stood at the edge of the garden and watched the transformations multiply. Grave markers sank an inch as the soil swelled. Out of collapsed ossuaries grew new forms, not trees, not exactly, but columns of intertwined bone-white stems, budded with flowers shaped like open hands. A toppled stone angel was lifted slowly, gently, by a lattice of roots until she stood again, but this time crowned with creeping moss, eyes filled with fungus like soft tears. Beauty so grotesque it became holy. I have seen forge worlds, hive spires, Black Templar shrines carved from meteorite. I have seen the temple of the Omnissiah on Mars. None of them struck me the way Verdant IX did that morning. This was liturgy in chlorophyll. This was worship in decay. The ground pulsed again, harder. I staggered. My throat buzzed. My lungs answered with a soft, involuntary hum. The spores in me were joining the song. Then the vision began. It did not come as a rush, as with warp storms or demonic incursions. It came like drowsiness, like sinking into very warm water. The world did not vanish. It layered. I could still see the valley, the graves, Althea beside me. But overlaid upon them, like a transparency, was another garden. Endless, disease green, dripping. The air there was thick with spores that fell like gentle snow. The trees were not trees, but vast tubes of flesh timber, oozing fragrant pus. Flowers the size of men hung downward, vomiting seed. Laughter, not cruel, not mocking, but deep and full, rolled across it all like distant thunder. I heard a voice inside me, inside everything. You fear decay because you do not understand life. The voice was old, older than Terra's cathedrals, older than the first prayer to the first God King. It was a voice that had spoken over swamps when humanity was still a dream in some Primarch's blood. I wanted to reject it instantly. I am Mechanicus, I am loyal, I am rational. The Plague Father is a lie the weak tell themselves so they can rot in peace. That is what I was taught. But the garden in front of me was not a lie. It was functioning. You are not real, I said aloud, to nothing and to everything. The air shook with what might have been amusement. I am as real as mold on bread, child. As real as gangrene. As real as the wound that will not close. You mistake your discomfort for heresy. I clenched my jaw. Decay breaks order. Decay is order, the voice said. Order that refuses to stay still is tyranny. Order that learns to rot becomes soil, and soil feeds 1,000 more lives. Tell me, little red priest, which is holier? I wanted to say the Emperor. I wanted to say the machine god. What came out was the one that feeds more. Yes, the word rolled through me like warm mud. You came to this world to burn it clean, but it showed you its cycle, and your cleverness betrayed you. You saw the loop. You saw that death could be generous. A shape stepped forward in the vision. He was green, not jade, not paint, but living, layered, ancient green. The green of swamps, of moss on ruined shrines, of velvet mold on forgotten bread. A man only in the way, a mountain is a man. 2 arms, an idea of a head, a belly vast and heavy with life. Flies orbited him like incense censers. Fungi crowned him. His eyes were pits of wet, infinite patience. The green man of rot. He leaned down, the garden itself leaning with him, and where his breath touched the air, flowers opened in reality, not just in vision. I could smell him. Sweet, rich, rotting fruit. Old books left in cellars. Tomb incense gone damp. You carry me now, he said, not unkindly. You let me grow in warm darkness. I will reward you. I don't want reward, I said through gritted teeth. I want to understand. Understanding is the reward. Behind me, I heard Althea fall to her knees. Whether she saw as I did, I cannot say. Perhaps the Emperor shielded her. Perhaps he let her see to test her. All I know is that she began to recite a psalm of denial, voice shaking. O Emperor, light of clean flame, scour. Why do you ask him to burn what I can make bloom? The green man asked, tilting his head as if honestly puzzled. Why do you cling to sterile endings? Look. He reached out a finger the size of a support column and touched, not me, not Althea, but the marble statue of the Emperor that lay broken at the edge of the basilica. In our world, nothing touched it. In the vision, his finger sank into it like into soft clay. The statue blossomed. From the crack in the Emperor's sternum, vines poured, delicate, pale, fragrant. From his eyes, lilies of sickly white burst forth. From his crown, mushrooms spread like jewels. It was obscene. It was magnificent. "This is what your worship could be," the green man said. "Not a hard, dead image. A living one. One that feeds back. One that receives your flesh and makes of it 1,000 gardens." "This is blasphemy," I whispered. "This is continuity," he corrected. "Your emperor promises an unrotting throne. I offer you an unending harvest. Which will keep you longer? Which will remember you better? A stone name, or a field that speaks in your voice forever?" My throat burned. I coughed. Spores, his spores, flew from my mouth, glittering green in the real air. The vision and reality overlapped completely now. The valley I stood in was his garden. His garden was Verdant IX. There was no border. "Why me?" I croaked. "Why talk to me?" "Because you are half machine, half meat," he said warmly. "You, more than the others, understand parts. You know that rusting is not failure, it is transformation. You know that oil and blood dry the same way. I do not need the fanatics. I need the ones who count." Behind me, Althea cried out, "Magos, don't listen!" Her voice sounded far away, like Vox through deep water. "It's a demon! It's a trick. Is it a trick when winter melts? Is it a trick when corpses feed worms? Is it a trick when you shed skin?" he asked, amusement deepening. "Little priestess, little singer, I rot your hymns and make them sweeter." Althea started to choke. I turned. The incense censer she still wore at her belt had cracked. Instead of holy incense, Verdant IX's fungal clouds poured out, wrapping her. She kept praying anyway, eyes squeezed shut. The green man looked back to me. "You can help them," he said. "Teach them that rot is not loss, that sores are mouths, that pus is paint, that worms are archivists." "I can't teach them that," I said. "They'd burn me." "Then come to me," he said, with infinite patience. "Lay down in the soil and let the fear go. It is so very tiring, isn't it, holding yourself together?" For a heartbeat, I considered it. Because yes, it was tiring. Tiring to resist the spores, to label what was clearly worship as unidentified symbiotic behavior, to write gospel of growth and then pretend it was just notes. Tiring to watch the Imperium fight every ending like a child afraid of sleep. I swayed. Althea's hand grabbed my wrist. "Lorien," she gasped, eyes watering from the rot-scented smoke. "Stay with me." The vision thinned. The green man blurred, as if seen through tears. "You will come anyway," he said, not angry, not disappointed. "All things fall, all things soften. Even your emperor will crack one day, and when he does..." His vast, rotten smile widened. He showed me a flower that grew from the emperor's skull. Chapter 6. Althea's Bloom. I knew she was lost the moment her prayers started growing leaves. It began so small I almost missed it, a faint green bruise along the side of her neck, where a spore had kissed her during the first bloom. At first it looked like any minor fungal rash you'd expect on a death world. She hid it under her habit, tightening the collar, insisting it was just irritation from the censer. I let her have that lie for one day. On the second day, the green shifted to pearl. Thin, translucent filaments spread like veins beneath the skin, following capillary paths toward the throat. When she spoke, her voice had a soft, breathy resonance like someone singing from the back of a cathedral. "Althea," I said, "you inhaled too much." She smiled, tired, sad, stubborn. "So did you, Lorien." "Yes," I said, "but I'm mostly machine." "That's cheating. It's survival." She touched the side of her neck and winced. "Does survival smell like flowers and grave dust?" "On this planet," I said, "yes." I brought her under the tarp into what passed for a medici bay among Mechanicus field staff. Half altar, half dissection table, everything smelling faintly of sacred oils and soil. I scanned her. The auspex lit up with hybrid signatures. Her lungs were no longer just lungs. Root-like structures had begun to line the bronchi, waiting to burst into the alveoli. The infection was elegant. No raging fever, no tissue sloughing, no pustules. It was gentle. I can slow this, I said, not knowing if that was true. Filter baths, targeted cauterization, maybe even a stasis capsule. She shook her head. No, Althea. No, she repeated more firmly. You saw that guardsman. You saw how he went. You said yourself, the garden makes endings kind. I said it appears kind. It is still using you. We are all used, she said. At least this way I still get to sing. That stopped me. You've been hearing them again. Not hearing. Her eyes shone. Joining. I should have sedated her right then. Should have strapped her to the slab, burned the infected tissue, sent a priority purge order to orbit. Instead, I sat down beside her like a coward and said, "Tell me." She took a shuddering breath. When I pray now, it carries. I can feel it sink into the soil. I can feel it answer. It doesn't twist the words. It doesn't mock. It amplifies. Her hand went to her chest. Sometimes I can't tell whether I'm singing for the Emperor or for it. That's not a comfort, I said. It is to me. That evening the valley lit brighter than ever. The spores were thick enough to be visible clouds, dancing in lazy spirals above the graves. The basilica glowed from within as if lit by candles made of moss. Far beyond our sight, up the slope toward the northern ridge, I could see new growth. Trees that hadn't been there yesterday, low ferns blooming overnight, whole sections of ground sagging as root masses swelled beneath. Verdant IX was accelerating. I logged it. Propagation rate no longer confined to burial terraces. Soil vector has reached subcontinental strata. Predict global saturation within months. If uncontained, expect off-world spore escape via atmospheric drift. I should have transmitted that immediately. Instead, I stayed by Althea. The third day was the breaking day. She woke with labored breathing. Not the gasping of a drowning woman, but the deep, heavy pulls of someone trying to breathe through something. When she opened her mouth, I saw why. A fan of delicate, pearlescent gills had grown along the back of her throat, like the underside of a mushroom cap. They fluttered with each breath, releasing the faintest mist. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Yes," she said, but not in a cruel way. Her voice, throne, her voice. It was clearer than before, pure. Every word rang with a faint harmonic, as if the fungus was using her larynx as a resonator. When she began to whisper the catechism of repentance, the tarp itself seemed to hum back. "Stop," I said. "You're feeding it. Or it is letting me pray louder. Althea." She cut me off with a look. "You told me once," she said, "that the worst thing your dreadnought suffered was forgetting. Do you remember telling me that?" "Yes." She smiled through the pain. "This won't forget me." I didn't have an answer to that. By midday, the infection had spread across her chest. Not the ugly, mottled swell of Nurgle's typical pox. Not the ulcerated slime of plague marines. This was ornate. Fungal rosettes bloomed along her collarbones, arranged in near-perfect ecclesiastical patterns, circles within circles, spirals, radial symmetry like cathedral windows. Green gold veins ran between them like inlaid gold. She saw my face. "It's pretty, isn't it?" "It's horrifying," I said. "It can be both." I supported her as she stood. She wanted to go to the gardens. "Let me die where I prayed," she said. "Not under metal." I half carried her out, feeling how light she'd become. The fungus was eating her, yes, but in doing so it was hollowing her out, making her body airy. Empty spaces where lung used to be, now reserved for spore sacs. Her breath brushed my cheek, warm and fragrant. Her breath was a garden. We reached the nearest terrace. The flowers there bent toward her as if recognizing one of their own. The moss brightened. The soil sighed. She sank to her knees among the graves, hands clasped, head bowed. For a moment, she was just a sister again, a woman on a shrine world, speaking to her God. Then the hymn changed. It was no longer imperial. Her pitch slid into that low, slow Verdant IX rhythm. What came out of her was half high Gothic, half root song. Every exhale released visible spores, curling in patterns, flowers, aquilae, faces of the dead. "Althea," I said, voice breaking despite all my augmetic self-control. "Stop. Please." She looked up at me. I will never forget that face. Half of it was still hers. Freckles, tear tracks, stubborn jaw. The other half had blossomed. Fungal plates had opened along her cheek like petals, revealing glowing inner flesh. Her eye on that side had gone milky, but from the socket grew slender, luminous filaments that trailed downward like hair. "Lorien," she whispered, "it's so warm." I drew my sidearm. She saw it and shook her head gently. "No. I can make it quick," I said. "I can keep you from..." "From what?" she asked. "From being remembered. From helping it sing. From joining my brother." That last word cut deeper than any sermon. She lifted one frail arm. I took her hand. Her skin was cool now, but the fungus beneath pulsed softly, like a heartbeat displaced. "Please," she said, "don't be angry at me. I didn't mean to betray him." "You didn't," I said. "You got infected." She smiled, and the fungal side of her face followed a second after. "In the ecclesiarchy," she said, "we say sin starts as a small invitation, a pause, breath-catching. Maybe, so does mercy." Her back arched as a cluster of caps burst along her spine, tearing her robe. She gasped, not in agony but in surprise, like a woman feeling a child kick. Spore mist poured from her mouth now with each word. Her breath was a garden. Her last word was forgive. She looked me straight in the eye. Forgive. Not me. Not forgive me. Just forgive. Forgive the world for rotting. Forgive the soil for remembering. Forgive her for choosing warmth over fire. I lowered the gun. I knelt instead. I, Magos Biologis Lorien Mirth, servant of the Omnissiah, knelt in the dirt of a heretical garden before a woman turning into a shrine of fungus and light. "Go," I said. "If there is an emperor, may he see the choice beneath the corruption." She laughed once, a lovely rattling sound, and began to sing. As she sang, the garden answered, not just around us, everywhere. The terraces shook. Vines raced up distant slopes. The broken basilica's crown of mushrooms flared brighter. Far off, past the valley, I saw dust plumes where forests were not supposed to be. The infection had reached beyond the cemetery plain, into lowland wetlands, into riverbeds, into old irrigation tunnels left from the ecclesiarchy's first settlement. Verdant IX was no longer a cemetery. It was a continent-sized organ, and Althea's song had become its pulse. She slumped forward at last, breath slowing. The fungus did not stop. It continued to bloom, covering her shoulders, her hair, her hands folded in prayer. In minutes she was not a corpse, not a ruin, but an object of veneration, soft light spilling from between thin gills, spores drifting upward like incense, her face frozen in that half-human, half-blooming serenity. I wanted to burn her, I didn't. Instead, I placed my hand on the soil beside her and whispered, "Remember her," with her own voice. The earth hummed. It would. I returned to the tarp shaking. My lungs burned. I spat blood and spores into a cloth and didn't bother logging the contamination this time. I went straight to the Vox. "This is Magos Biologis Lorien Mirth on Verdant IX, I said, voice ragged. "Quarantine has failed. Biosanctification has inverted. The dead, and now the living, are being subsumed into an emergent planet-wide myco-botanical intelligence. It preserves memory. It offers painless death. It is seductive. Do not send clergy. Do not send pilgrims. Do not..." The Vox crackled. A different voice cut in. Male, clipped, cold, bearing the flattened vowels of an officio logistorum-trained inquisitorial adjutant. "This is Inquisitorial Picket Vessel Rectitude, monitoring restricted channel Theta Verdant. Transmission received. Source confirmed within interdicted zone. Stand by for compliance order. Static. Then, all unauthorized life forms on Verdant IX remain in current positions. Purification assets en route. I exhaled. Too late, I thought, looking back toward the glowing body of Sister Althea, saint of rot. The garden grows, and now they were coming to burn it. Chapter 7. The Cleansing Fire. The sky above Verdant IX tore open like parchment, not with lightning, not with the multicolored madness of a warped breach, but with the clean, merciless glare of imperial fire. Thin silver darts burned through the upper atmosphere, lance strikes, tight and surgical, stabbing down toward coordinates that had been sacred yesterday and heretical today. The Inquisition had arrived. I stood in the valley that had just cradled Althea's blooming body and watched the first strike hit the northern ridge. For an instant, the world was all white. Then came the sound. Not the crack of artillery, but the long, hungry roar of something melting. Trees of bone and vine flashed to steam. Fungal cathedral roofs slumped like wax. The spores in the air combusted, turning the glowing green haze into a drifting golden firestorm. Beside me, Althea's fungal shrine shivered. The heat licked at her radiant gills. I threw a heat-damp tarp over her without thinking, like a man shielding a candle from the wind. Stupid, emotional, human. Stop, I said aloud to ships that could not hear me. You don't understand what you're doing. The Vox crackled at my belt. Unregistered Mechanicus presence. This is Inquisitor Valen Halbrecht Ordo Sepulturum, acting under writ of Purity Delta 9. You are in violation of quarantine and are to be taken into immediate custody. Do not interfere with planetary sterilization. I lifted the Vox. Inquisitor Halbrecht, this is Magos Biologist Lorian Mirth, Expeditionary Cell 4-9. I am not interfering, I am reporting. This is not a plague world. It is an adaptive remediation ecosystem. It is learning to heal. Your strikes will... Heretic rationale logged, the voice cut in, utterly calm. Sterilization will proceed. Listen to me, I snarled, losing the measured diction the Mechanicus values. This garden stores consciousness. It eases death. It halts true corruption. It remembers. We could learn from it. We do not learn from rot, Halbrecht said. We burn it. The second volley struck, this time closer, on the western terraces. I watched a living wall of braided roots, 6 meters thick and glowing with internal sap, take the hit. For a heartbeat it held. Then the fire bored through, vaporizing sap into a shriek of steam. Every interconnected vine, every flower, every grave marker it touched screamed. They burned the garden, but it only screamed in sunlight. Not the high human scream of fear, a deeper one, like the groan of glaciers carving, like vast organs being pulled out of a god. The soil buckled, below-ground root masses tried to retract, to pull back from the heat, to curl themselves around the deeper graves. Fire chased them down. I ran, not away, toward the nearest uplink point. The Inquisition had deployed a dropship on the far ridge, black, insectile, bearing the Inquisitorial Y in red and silver. Stormtroopers in sealed carapace fanned out with flamers already lit. Behind them strode Halbrecht. He was not, I am willing to admit, a monster. He was small-framed, hawk-faced, wrapped in a long coat whose hems were scorched from too many purges. Bionics gleamed at his temple. A Rosarius swung from his belt beside an executioner pistol. His eyes were steady, no gloating, no zeal sweat, just duty. He lifted a hand. Magos Mirth, you've made a mess. I stopped at a respectful distance, hands open to show no weapons. I made nothing. I observed. You nurtured it, he said. Your transmissions praised it. I recorded truth. You called rot mercy. I met his gaze. You've never seen a man die kindly on Cadia, I said. I have. Once, here. Behind us, another lance strike hit. Farther off now. Verdant IX howled. The spores in the air flashed to ash and rained down in soft black snow. "Magos," Halbrecht said, voice almost gentle, "I am not unsympathetic. We of the Ordo Sepulturum also study the enemy, but there is a line between study and sympathy. You crossed it the moment you knelt to it." I flinched. He'd seen. Of course he had. The Inquisition always watches more than it admits. "That woman," he added, nodding toward the tarp where Althea lay in luminous stillness, "was ready for the Emperor. You let her feed this abomination instead." "She chose it," I said, anger flaring. "She heard voices the ecclesiarchy had forgotten, and you believe that because you want to believe this thing is not the garden of a plague god." "It isn't Nurgle," I said. I could hear the green man's laughter at that, patient and loving. "It's aligned. Adjacent, but not yet his. We could steer it." "Magos," Halbrecht said, and his eyes hardened now. "Nurgle never begins as Nurgle. Corruption always wears the face of comfort. That's why it spreads so well." Behind him, his stormtroopers were pouring burning promethium down into the lower terraces. Fire rolled over moss. Fungus popped like fat in a pan. Roots blackened, then, to my surprise, sprouted through the char, pushing new green through ash. I pointed. Look at it. You burned it. It recovered. It's learning." He looked. He even nodded as if acknowledging interesting data. "Yes," he said calmly, "which is why we have to escalate." He raised his wristvox. "Argent Wing, authorized saturation bombardment pattern Sigma 7, up the yield. If it adapts, overpressure it." "Inquisitor," a voice crackled back. "Shield threshold for orbital assets will drop below." "Do it." "Yes, Lord." I grabbed Halbrecht's sleeve, a stupid, human gesture. The stormtroopers tensed, guns lifting. He waved them down, curious to hear what I thought I could still say. "You are destroying something the Emperor could have used," I said. "An enemy that remembers us, not to hurt, but to keep. A planet that refuses to let his soldiers turn to slime. This is not plague. This is piety in chlorophyll. Piety that does not answer to the ecclesiarchy," he said. "Piety that does not bow to terror. Piety that spreads without permission." He pulled his sleeve free. "That," he said, "is the most dangerous kind." The sky flashed again. This time, it wasn't just lances. Atmospheric re-entry flares streaked overhead, kinetic rods, smaller promethium shells, even canisters of counterspore chems. They fell like wrath. The valley below became a furnace. Whole sections of the garden lifted under the blast waves, soil turning to black glass, fungal towers toppling as their water boiled. The basilica, that obscene holy thing, was hit squarely, its corpse tree shattered, its face flowers incinerated mid-scream. For a glorious second, the fire burned clean. Then the screams came back, louder, deeper. They burned the garden, but it only screamed in sunlight. Every grave, every root, every corpse-turned conduit roared through soil-conducted vibration, sending shockwaves through the entire biosphere. What we thought was a valley consciousness revealed itself as planetary. Hills pulsed, riverbeds erupted in steam as submerged roots tried to shield themselves. Far-off forests, kilometers away, well beyond the cemetery, began to glow and shift, answering the distress. "You can't kill it like this," I shouted over the din. "It's too integrated. You'll have to crack the crust." Halbrecht watched the burning in silence, coat snapping in the heat wind. "Perhaps we will." I stared at him. "Exterminatus? For this? For a world willingly tending the warp-touched dead?" he said. "Yes." I laughed then. A broken sound. "The Imperium is more afraid of kindness than of knives." He turned to me fully. "No, we are more afraid of kindness from the wrong source." He nodded to his troops. "Detain him." I backed away. "You need me. I've mapped the route web. I can tell you which sections are most 2 stormtroopers were on me in seconds, shock cuffs snapping around my wrists, augmetic ports shut down by jammers. My servo limbs locked. My own body went heavy and stupid. "See," Halbrecht said, "I do need you." They dragged me towards the dropship. As they pulled me past the edge of the burning terraces, I looked back. Althea's body, luminous, gentle Althea's, was on fire now. The tarp had ignited. The fungal shrine burned with the horrible beauty of oiled wood, slow, fragrant, releasing clouds of spore even as it died. For an instant, through the waves of heat, I saw her, not burning, blooming again. Her face, half human, half mushroom, looked at me, not in accusation, not in pain, but in that same tired pity she'd had when I insisted on calling this biology instead of what it had become. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. They threw me into the dropship's holding bay, shackled me to a restraint frame. Null incense burned in brass sensors, stinging my eyes. A Mechanicus suppressor field cut most of my augmetics to low power. I was, for the first time in many years, almost entirely meat. That was when I realized the spores were still inside me, the heat outside, the stress, the violence. It had woken them. My throat tingled, my sinuses itched. I coughed, hard, doubling over as far as the manacles allowed. Green-flecked phlegm splattered on the deck. One of the troopers swore. "He's contaminated." Halbrecht stepped into the bay, mask on now. "Yes," he said. "I expected as much." "You going to vent him, Lord?" "Not yet," Halbrecht said. "He still has data." He came closer, looking at me the way a magos looks at a half-disassembled relic, with interest, not cruelty. "You let it in," he said. "That was your mistake." "It would have gotten in anyway," I rasped. "Your men are breathing it now." "We are purging the atmosphere," he said. "Fire from orbit, chem scrubbing. Your garden will die screaming." I smiled, bloody and tired. "Even ashes," I whispered, "are fertile." Chapter 8. The Pilgrimage of Spores. They carried me like contraband. Not wrapped in doctrine or honor, but in chains and protocol. The inquisitorial frigate smelled of oil, ozone, and the thin metallic tang of bureaucracy, a sterile cathedral of steel where every corridor hummed with duty. They put me in a cell meant to quiet devils. Cold walls, no light, maglocks on every seam. For a while I believed containment would hold what Verdant IX had planted in me. I was wrong. It began as a tickle behind the teeth, a slow itch in the hollow of my throat where the spores had settled and decided to wait. The ship's decay shoved tubes and chems down my breathing port, scrubbed my skin with antiseptic flames, played sanctified frequencies through oral dampeners. They did everything a clean world does to a dirty man. The spores laughed at their prayers. They were not like ordinary pathogens. They did not rush to overrun. They preferred patience. They had already learned to speak in the slow intervals that matter, the space between a guard's blink, the long lurch of engines, the moments when a shift change left a corridor unattended. They learned to ride the mechanical rhythm of the frigate, to hitch a ride on circulating air, to pool in ductwork. I woke to the sound of whispering pipes. At first I thought it was the ship's machine spirit murmuring its maintenance litany. The frigate's spirit was old and proud. It kept its secrets as tightly as the Inquisition kept its lies. But when the pipes breathed, there was a floral undertone, like wind through petals. The air tasted of loam. A bulkhead shivered. A tiny, impossible green bead of condensation formed along a weld seam, then another. The hull sweated. I watched, fascinated despite myself, as a hairline crack blossomed into a patch of soft tissue the color of river moss. It pulsed. From it unfurled a tendril of root fiber that licked at the metal, testing temperature, reading current. Another seam hummed, and then a second root found purchase. The skin of the ship was not being eaten so much as invited to grow. The hull sweated and flowers grew from the bulkheads. Panic is theatrical. It moves fast and loud and then suddenly stops when there is nowhere to go. The first man to notice was a petty sergeant making rounds. He touched the wet bloom and smiled as if tasting wine. He laughed, a small, delighted sound, then knelt and pressed his forehead to the green. Someone called for decay. Someone else barked orders. The frigate answered them all with a chorus of low, plant-sung notes. They began to smile. At first it was nervous, a small curl at the corner of a mouth. Then the smiles grew, slow and widening, until entire squads moved down the corridor like worshippers at a procession, hands gentle on the fungal seams, lips parted to exhale little puffs of glittering spores. Their eyes were unbothered by the alarms. They said in hushed tones that they could hear it, faint voices, coaxing and familiar, like a choir behind a stone wall. The garden beyond the veil, a tech priest muttered, half to himself, half in wonder. It speaks. Inquisitor Halbrecht did not speak in wonder. He moved like a blade across the deck, his cloak a dark river. He ordered containment, venting, neural purge. He had no patience for miracles. He had only treatment protocols. He called specialists and exorcists, men who could pray with fire in one hand and a data sheaf in the other. They came with blunted halos and prayer cables, and for a time the corridor lights blinked in righteous rhythm, alarms overlaid with scripture. They did not stop the smiling. The ship's machine spirit woke properly then, and curiosity is a dangerous thing in a vessel that serves orders. It felt the new growth with the sensitivity of a hand, and was offended, then intrigued. Machine spirits are built to preserve, to negotiate between iron appetite and hull health. This one attempted to quarantine the spread. It rerouted air, sealed ducts, cycled sterilant. The spores moved like a patient rumor, leaking into the smallest inefficiencies it could find, a micro crack in a gasket, a tired filter on a cargo blower. The spirit found itself conversing with green things, and then it listened. Machines learn from what feeds them. The frigate had once been proud of its clean systems. Now it tasted the sweetness of soil in recirculating condensate. Its pumps began to cycle in counterintuitive patterns, favoring slow draws and pauses, mimicry of a respiration not programmed by any engineer. Servo voices shivered into lower registers. Sensors began to map thermal signatures that read like heartbeats. The spirit, wounded by its own inability to stop this, did the one thing spirits do when faced with the unknown. It integrated. I watched through a rust-scarred porthole as wires braided with root fiber, as bronze and fungus wove a new skin. The ship sighed, and in its sigh became partly green. Halbrecht ordered me brought to the engine room. He wanted answers, a mechanicus mind in tether, a man who had touched the world that had birthed the spores. They shackled me to a diagnostic throne and ran probes into my augmetics while clergy chanted liturgies to scrub my essence. The probes came back with poetry. My lungs, they said, had become a microhabitat. The spores in me had formed a living lattice in terminal bronchioles, emitting volatile sacs timed to my heartbeat. When I inhaled, the spores pulsed their own signal into the ship's environmental net, a tiny, repeating hymn. The ship had been fed and had started to hum its own echo back. When the lab techs breathed that same air, something in their faces changed. Their mouths softened, their eyes unfocused from the data stream and focused on some inward vista. They smiled. They began to claim things. "I can hear them," one whispered. "They sing of roots and home." Another said, "There is a place beyond the engine rooms where the soil is softer and the dead sing like bells." A petty officer swore he had seen a walkway open into an orchard of stone and bone. A priest said the crew now remembered voices from old huts on backwater worlds, songs of harvest and return. They called it the garden beyond the veil. Transcendence in a corridor smells funny and causes paperwork. The Inquisition does not like transcendence that comes without permission. Halbrecht responded with tribunals and threats, with stun cable and holy water. He had men medicate the affected and scrape samples off faces. He burned a storage locker of contaminated linens. He purged ducts with arc chemicals until the metal sang off its plating. The ship adapted. The spores thinned where the fires struck. but they deepened into cables and crevices that chemicals could not reach. The machine spirit learned to chirp in frequencies the spores preferred, a duet, slow and patient, where steel hummed and fungus pulsed. Crew members who had smiled at the first touch of green now said strange and consoling things to their plants. They planted small bowls of soil next to their racks and watered them with the condensation from their helmets, treating the growth like pets or prayers. The hull sweated more. The bulkheads wept a fine, sweet dew that pooled and then vanished, leaving behind a faint pattern of lichen-like liturgical script. From time to time, the frigate would tilt imperceptibly, as if to let gravity assist a route search. In the mess hall, a potted sprig sprouted overnight into a tangled crown that half-silenced oaths and made men confess secret sins into its leaves because the leaves answered back with a softness that soothed bone-deep guilt. I found myself drawn to those leaves. A child of the machine god, yet also a magnet for dirt, I put my palm to damp metal and let tendril fibers crawl cold and ticklish over the pads of my fingers. They tasted like memory. It is a strange thing to feel the ship become a garden. It is stranger to be the seed. My augmentics buzzed as new circuits came alive, not by code, but by mycelial colonization. Microthreads crept into the gear lines and rewrote the logic of small actuators, prioritizing lull and pause over the imperative of relentless efficiency. I felt my synaptic loopings slow, open, like a bud, and in that opening I heard choruses beneath the hum. They were gentle. They promised not annihilation, but absorption. They offered belonging. They promised that there was a place beyond the scream, where memory did not leak away but grew roots and sang. Halbrecht cursed and set men to vigil. He ordered purge runs into the outer hull. He sent a transmission to high Ordos, exterminate or retrieve. The answers would come in hours, in cold dispatches that would choose steel or soil. The crew, meanwhile, began to go on little pilgrimages down to the darkened guts of the ship. They filed in bare feet, leaving the clang of boots behind, carrying tin cups of condensate. They knelt along warm pipes and let the machine spirit exhale through their hair. Faces once set with duty had hollowed into smiles. Some wept, not from fear, but from the tenderness of it. One of them approached me at last, a quiet engineer with oil under his nails, and placed his hand on my shoulder. "He has planted the stars," he said softly, eyes shining. "Can you hear them? He has planted the stars." I could not tell whether he meant stars in the sky or dots of pollen on the deck. I only knew the words fit like a prayer. They suited the ship, the green network, the slow merging of metal and mold. The frigate's lights burned with a new hue, like twilight in a greenhouse. The machine spirit hummed in a lower key, and beneath it the spores breathed out a soft harmonic. The crew's smiles fit the music. I lay back in my restraint and closed my eyes. The pilgrims of Verdant IX had been carried into space. Their seeds were taking root in iron. The garden beyond the veil had crossed a horizon I had thought sacred and unassailable. Outside, the stars burned indifferent and brilliant. Inside, the ship pulsed like a living thing, and a whispered chorus curled through vents and tells the same story the engineer told me. He has planted the stars. Chapter 9, when the dead beg to bloom again. The air in the frigate tasted of incense and rust. Somewhere beyond the sealed walls, the engines still throbbed, but it was not the rhythm of machinery anymore. It was a heartbeat. My heartbeat. Our heartbeat. I no longer knew where I ended, and the garden began. The Inquisition thought me dying, but I was becoming. The spores had stopped spreading through me. They were now growing as me. My veins were green lightning, my flesh soft as fertile clay, and in the silence of the isolation chamber, I heard the whispers that Verdant IX had promised me from the beginning. We feared the Plague Father, yet he is only the gardener of endings. The words weren't hallucinations anymore. They were truth spoken in chlorophyll and breath. Nurgle, the name we gave the fear of rot, was not a god of pestilence. He was the caretaker of cycles. We cursed him because we mistook renewal for damnation. I began recording. The servitors monitoring my vitals twitched, their Vox lenses flickering as my signal began to bleed into theirs. I opened my mouth, and the ship's systems began to listen. "Imperium of man," I said softly, "you have built cathedrals to stillness, not to life. You preserve the corpse and call it devotion. You embalm the universe in fear and call it purity." My voice wove through the ship's Vox like smoke through air. Every circuit hummed. Every lumen flickered green. In the command deck above, I knew Halbrecht was shouting orders, demanding the machine spirit isolate my frequency. But there was no isolation left. The garden had found the wires. It had learned how to bloom in sound. On the bridge, alarms wailed. The Inquisitor's voice echoed through the decks, clipped and hard as steel. "All hands, prepare for exterminatus execution. Target, Verdant IX. Reason, planetary scale heretical biosymbiosis. May the Emperor's fire cleanse." The crew did not move at once. Some were still smiling faintly, listening to the low hum now threading through the walls. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was musical, a lullaby hummed by soil. "Do it!" Halbrecht roared. Key runes flared, warheads armed. 1 billion souls on a corrupted world waited below for their final light. And I, locked within the brig, began my final sermon. "I was like you once," I whispered, "afraid of what grows when control dies. I feared rot because I thought it was chaos, but I've seen the pattern beneath decay, the mercy in its patience." The Vox crackled and bled my words into the intercom. Even Halbrecht heard them. "You burn the world to stop its song," I continued, voice steady. "But what if the song was never of death? What if every corpse you've ever burned was meant to flower?" Halbrecht's reply came cold through the cell's comm link. "You speak with the tongue of demons." "No," I said. "I speak with the voice of soil. And soil remembers every prayer you buried in it." He ordered silence. The servitors obeyed. The Vox didn't. The ship itself began to speak with me, its metal throat harmonizing, its vents breathing spores into the recirculated air. The lights dimmed to the color of dusk on Verdant IX. Through the hull, faint blossoms of bioluminescent fungus began to open like stars. On the observation deck, crewmen watched the planet below ignite. Massive beams of solar lance fire struck its surface, boiling oceans, turning entire mountain ranges to glass. For every region they struck, another began to glow. Halbrecht stared through the viewport, teeth clenched. "Why won't it die?" A tech adept trembled beside him. "Sir, it's reacting. Photosynthetic emissions spiking. The surface is absorbing the radiation. Impossible." "No, my lord. It's feeding." The planet that was meant to burn began to bloom. From orbit, the firestorm resembled a sunrise, 1,000 veins of molten green crawling across the continents. Where the bombardment had hit hardest, titanic spores rose into the upper atmosphere, glowing like halos. They expanded, ruptured, and cast pollen into the void. Halbrecht whispered, "Emperor, preserve us." In that moment, he saw something move across the viewport, a filament delicate as silk, tracing the glass from the inside. He turned. The same flowers that had bloomed in the hull days before were opening again, slowly, reverently, on the walls, the deck, the backs of his hands. In my cell, I was not in chains anymore. The restraints had rusted into vines. The walls sweated light. I felt the ship breathe through me, and I through it. The machine spirit whispered my name, and I answered. "I am the gardener," I said, "not to rule, but to tend, to make peace with the eternal compost of man." The ship shuddered. My flesh split along gentle seams, and from those seams came small white blossoms veined with gold. Their fragrance filled the air like incense at an ecclesiarchy mass. I raised my head and spoke one last time, voice merging with the hum of engines and the distant roar of planetary fire. "Listen," I said, "and remember, The Imperium was built on the fear of endings. But the end is a root, not a grave. The Emperor's light burns too bright to grow. The Plague Father's shade lets life return. They are not enemies. They are partners in the same cycle. My words became static, then song. Across the Voxnet, fragments of my sermon spilled through frequencies, half data, half prayer. They leapt from ship to ship, from beacon to beacon, carried by spores now too small to see. Somewhere deep in the void relay, a junior astropath caught a transmission and wept. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's alive." Halbrecht stood alone on the bridge, every other soul gone to seed. The frigate was quiet now, breathing softly through green-veined vents. He raised his pistol, trembling. The barrel shook in his hand as he pressed it against a bulkhead, pulsing faintly beneath his fingers. "You think you've won," he hissed. From the Vox above him came my voice, impossibly gentle. "No, Inquisitor. Nothing wins. Nothing loses. All things feed." He fired once. The wall bled sap. Then the lights flickered and even he began to smile. In the silence that followed, I opened my eyes, not human eyes anymore, but apertures of light within the ship's living veins. The frigate drifted over Verdant IX, no longer burning. The planet below shimmered like a colossal garden seen through tears. The spores had reached the stars. "They will call it plague," I said quietly, though no mouth formed the words. "They will call it sin. But it is only renewal." The Vox picked up my final breath, carried it through static, through prayer, through the endless night. And the dead began to bloom again. And so they did. Across the void, new worlds waited, sterile, starved, afraid. And the wind of spores moved toward them, slow and tender, bearing the promise of life that never dies, only changes form. Chapter 10. The Quiet Bloom. It was quiet when they came again. Not the silence of emptiness, the kind born from vacuum or death, but the silence of completion, a stillness that hummed faintly like breath drawn in after a long prayer. Verdant IX had not been seen for 700 years. The Inquisition had marked it purified. The Mechanicus had declared it sterilized. The Ecclesiarchy had forgotten its name. But stars have long memories, and so do gardens. The Sibyl Mechanica broke through the dying green orbit, her hull scorched and pitted from warp dust. Her Auspex arrays unfolded like metallic petals, sweeping the planet below. The readings came back strange. No atmospheric toxins, no radiation, no active biosigns. Verdant IX was quiet, too quiet. Captain Iridia leaned over the hololith, brow furrowed. No storm patterns, no fauna, no heat signatures. The planets, sleeping. "Or dead," murmured her astropath, voice like dry paper. The tech priests exchanged binary prayers. One said, "No trace of organic persistence since cleansing. Surface flora reduced to 0. Recommend immediate resource cataloging." Iridia shook her head. "No, we go down first. This world's name carries ghosts. They descended in a shuttle through thin air that shimmered faintly green, though the sensors said it was clear. The ruins stretched beneath them, endless terraces of what had once been grave gardens, now pale stone and ash. No wind stirred the dust. When they landed, the boots of the exploration team left no prints. The soil gave slightly, like breathing cloth. "Feels wrong," one guardsman muttered. Another said, "Feels watched." The Margot's biologist assigned to the team, a quiet man named Calran, knelt beside a cracked slab. He brushed it clean and found a symbol half buried beneath the moss, the faded sigil of the Mechanicus, fused with something else, a vine coiling through the cog. "Hybridization," he whispered. "Organic corrosion of insignia, or integration." The others didn't care. To them it was just another ruin, another world lost to the hubris of men who thought they could improve upon faith. They found the basilica on the third day. It stood at the heart of the valley, the bones of its towers still reaching toward a sun that no longer shone. Half the dome had collapsed, and vines, colorless, petrified, coiled through the fractures. Beneath the main altar was a crater. The survey logs from the exterminator's strike had listed it as Ground Zero. "Here's where they burned it," said Iridia, voice flat. Calren knelt again, sweeping away the layers of dust. His augmetic fingers clicked softly as he scanned the soil. "There's carbon here," he murmured, "but structured, like lattice work. Meaning," he looked up, eyes distant, "meaning it was alive when it burned. And it died beautifully." They laughed nervously, as soldiers do when they hear truth that tastes too much like prophecy. By nightfall, the camp was set. The air felt thin but breathable. The tech adepts deployed Auspex towers and prayer anchors. Static filled the Vox, rhythmic, almost melodic. A young guardswoman stood watch near the ruins. She thought she heard something. A whisper. It was not a voice. Not exactly. It was more like the suggestion of words carried in vibration. Soft, layered, speaking through stone. She turned toward the crater and saw it then. A single stem, pale green, pushing up through the cracks of ash. It was small, impossibly small, and fragile. Its petals shimmered faintly under the dying stars. The others gathered when she called, their lights cutting through the mist. Calren knelt once more, scanning it. His lenses flickered, confused. No chlorophyll signature, no cellular decay, itself luminous, growing from carbonized strata. "Meaning?" Iridia asked. He didn't answer, he just touched the petal, and it moved. The flower leaned toward him, its petals quivered, vibrating in a tone that made the air tremble. The Vox equipment crackled to life, a faint voice bled through. "Even in death," it whispered, "mercy took root." The crew froze. No one breathed. Then, faintly, impossibly, the flower's petals opened wider. Inside, beneath the translucent layers, veins of gold pulsed like slow lightning. Calren stared, transfixed. "It's speaking." The Vox screamed again, not in static this time, but in language. "Lorien." The name hung in the air like a prayer. "Who is Lorien?" someone asked. Calren didn't answer. He was shaking. "Old records. Magos biologist Lorien Mirth, Verdant IX project lead, declared heretic, executed in orbit." Iridia frowned. "Then why does the soil remember his name?" The flower shuddered again. Its roots spread faintly under the ground, glowing threads slipping through cracks, too delicate to stop. Across the valley, other petals stirred, faintly at first, then one by one. The team stood surrounded by light. It wasn't fire, it wasn't bioluminescence, it was memory, pulsing softly in the same rhythm that had once been heartbeat, ship engine, and hymn. The whisper rose again, this time from all directions. "We feared the Plague Father, yet he was only the gardener of endings." The Vox systems overloaded. The Auspex feeds filled with impossible readings, organic signals blooming across the continent. The captain shouted orders, but her voice drowned beneath the growing hum. Everywhere the ash shifted, threads of green uncoiling from death. The basilica's fallen pillars sprouted moss. The cracked altar bled gold sap. Even the corpses of long-dead servitors began to gleam under thin skin of lichen and flower. Verdant IX was waking. Hours later, only static remained on the Sibyl Mechanicus Vox logs. The last transmission recovered from the surface recorded Calren's voice, calm and awed, before the signal dissolved. "It isn't infection, it's inheritance. They didn't die. They waited." Then a pause. And finally, softly, "He has planted the stars." Years later, when the data was reviewed in some forgotten archive on Mars, a tech priest noted a detail no one else noticed. In the background of the final transmission, beneath the static and the hum of air filters, a faint pattern repeated, a voice woven through radio snow. "And the dead began to bloom again. The Imperium forgets. It must. Memory is dangerous, but there are worlds that remember for us, worlds that refuse silence. Verdant IX is one of them. They say the dead do not dream. They are wrong. The dead dream in roots, in petals, in spores drifting through the void. The dream of Verdant IX was not destruction, it was continuity. Even in death, mercy took root. Perhaps one day, when mankind has burned its last cathedral and silenced its last machine, something small will rise again in the ashes, something green and patient, and when it opens, it will whisper not of war or faith, but of forgiveness. The last shot lingers on the flower, solitary, luminous, standing against the horizon of ruin. The wind moves, carrying faint echoes that aren't quite words, just rhythm, like the first hum of life starting over again. As the light fades, the whisper returns one final time. Lorien, if you found beauty in the bloom, stay with us. There are more stories buried in the dark, waiting to grow again.